Let's have a conversation about the way we make decisions and the way our lives are affected by people who are not us. First thing I want all of you to do is answer these 3 questions. Not out loud, just think about them for yourself. The first question I want you to answer is, do you believe there's any worldview, any ideology that has the answer for everything that ails us, for every challenge that confronts us every day? So, when you think about worldviews, they might be religious worldviews, they might be political worldviews, they might be social worldviews. Does anything that you have seen, anything that you're involved with, have the answer for everything? The next question I want you to think about is, does the system currently provide access to everybody equally? So when decisions are getting made on our behalf, every day in Canberra or in Parliament House here in Melbourne, is everybody involved equally in that conversation? The third thing I want you to think about is whether or not the people who are making the decisions on our behalf are actually always genuinely reflecting the will of the people. Do they actually reflect what the majority of people want? Let that sink for a couple of seconds. We're there, we're percolating on those things. They're uncomfortable, but that's okay. We spend years thinking about them. So where we are at the moment is we're in a really kind of unusual space. All you've heard and all you've seen in the last couple of days here, and certainly, you know, the Internet of Things conversation that Jamie just walked you through, tells us that our world is changing. Oma, who you see on the screen there, is my grandmother. My grandmother is 99 years old. When you speak to my grandmother about the world in which she grew up in, everything about her existence is different. Everything. Travel, transport, finance, communication, education, everything about being alive every day is different. But the political system with which we make decisions is exactly the same. So what we have is a system that was once useful, that is built and still operating for a world that doesn't even exist anymore. So everything has moved on, we're sophisticated, we're evolving, we're technological, and yet we still think it's appropriate to have an environment where people represent us on the basis that once every 3 years, or in state once every 4 years, you go to a polling booth and you say, I'm going to trust you to make 10,000 decisions on my behalf for the next 4 years because you know what I want and I kind of know what you're going to do. Well, that is absolute nonsense. That does not exist, hasn't existed, but it was the best system we could have had for a long period of time. But we've moved on technologically. So the world allows us to have this conversation very differently now. So what we need less of in a democracy, first and foremost, is ideology. Because that first question that I asked you about a worldview and a perspective, an ideology, is that if you believe that there is no one system, no one belief, left of politics, right of politics, it's all a nonsense, religious beliefs, whatever, that there is no one belief that has the answer for everything, then it stands to reason that what we need in the way that we make decisions is actually to have a solutions-oriented approach. And if you're going to have a solutions-oriented approach, which is, I don't have an answer for this question by virtue of my beliefs, I need to know the facts, I need to understand the information, and on the basis of that information, I need to then decide what is the best outcome for me and us collectively, well then you can't start the conversation with ideology, which is where we are now. Equally, we need less interest group money, and you'll notice that I don't say corporate money, I say interest group money. Because the reality is that every political party for which you can vote right now is owned by someone. Somebody is putting money into their coffers and they are doing it because they expect an outcome. That's okay. Some of those things you'll agree with. Some of the parties you'll agree with. You'll believe in what they have to say and you'll believe in the outcome. But there is definitely a question about access when it comes to the way that money gets provided in the political system. Because if you can't put $1 million into a political party, but I can put $1 million into a political party, by virtue of that financial advantage, I can now start to change the conversation. That's not democracy. The next one is opaqueness. There are too many things we don't know. Decisions are getting made on our behalf every day, and it's based on information that we continually get told, that's confidential, that's national security, that's not for us to know. But let's peel that back again. Because if this is a genuine democracy that we're talking about, Genuine democracy starts with the idea that people are making decisions on our behalf, and they're spending money that is ours. It's your taxpayer dollar. You work every day, a big chunk of it goes out. That's the money they're spending. So on what basis can those decisions get made with money that is ours, and we're not allowed to know why those decisions are getting made? So they're the things that are troubling about the way our democracy works at the moment. What we need more of, quite obviously then, is a solutions-oriented approach. We need a genuine will of the people. So let's talk about what democracy means. Democracy, by definition, is about the enactment of the will of the people. How can you enact the will of the people if you never have a conversation with the people? Is it meant to be through mental telepathy, that they know what we want on every issue every day? With a constituency that is being put forward as a pretense about being in your best interest. Sometimes it will be in your best interest, but sometimes it won't. And what's critical in a democracy is that the majority position, what we collectively want, is what gets decided. That is the basis of democracy. And then finally, we need transparency on everything. We need to know, unless it is genuinely a national security issue, there is no reason that we shouldn't have access to the information. So it's fair to say that there are a lot of groups around the world who are working on this issue. And it's a big, meaty, hairy, scary, audacious issue. Yeah, democracy. It's been around a long time, and it sits in a lot of different places, and it's eroded everywhere. What's happening at the moment is there are groups that are popping up all over the place. What you'll see on the screen now, the one that looks like a map, obviously, of Iceland, specifically refers to an extraordinary set of events that happened not long ago, where Iceland became the first nation to crowdsource a constitution. Think about that. They went to every person in the country and gave them an opportunity to have a conversation about what the constitution of that country would be. That's a bloody good place to start when you're trying to start a democracy, that you can have input and that the politicians are listening. The group at the bottom, Democracy Earth, has been created in South America by probably the biggest rock star in the democracy innovation space in the world, Pierre Mancini. They're doing a terrific job in a specific part of the world where there are very specific problems. At the top you see Flux. A number of you will have heard about Flux. I think they ran for the last federal election here in Australia. Another blockchain kind of emerging innovation to democracy. And what you'll see now is the book, Democracy Squared. Democracy Squared is a project that started in the UK. It has been an investigation by a couple of researchers who have investigated a variety of these democratic innovations all over the world. And they've highlighted what they think are the 4 or 5 best potential opportunities for the world to reboot democracy so that billions of people can actually have freedom and self-determination. Thankfully, MiVote is one of the groups in that book. It's out now. You should buy it. Read about what's going on in democracy. By the way, we make no money from that, but you should read it because it's an important conversation. But what's critical now, what is inevitable now, is that like everything else you've heard and seen here, like the last conversation from Jamie, is that digital democracy is inevitable. It is coming whether the politicians want it or not. It is coming whether the traditional parties are prepared for it or not. Because we can do it, and we are doing it, all over the world in different ways. Some groups are focusing on blockchain, and it's a technological focus. Other groups are focusing on local issues, some national issues, some participation, some voting mechanisms. Where we'll end up, which will become the overarching system that is operated around the world, or there might not be one, there might be 2 or 3, that's the only thing we don't know yet. But guaranteed, within 20 years, you'll be voting regularly in some form of technological platform. Because going to the polls every 3 years and writing on a piece of paper and that going into someone and people making decisions on our behalf every day is dead. It cannot continue anymore, and nobody wants it to continue anymore. Because the world isn't getting better, it's getting harder and harder for more and more people. And that's a problem, because when we vote and we have our say, a variety of different decisions will get made. So how are people going about it? What kind of interventions need to happen? What's MiVote? MiVote is a Melbourne-born democratic innovation. It's a movement, and it's the fastest growing political movement in the world at the moment. MiVote fundamentally asks a different set of questions. It specifically says that if you're going to start with democracy, let's look at it this way. It was invented basically with an entrepreneurial perspective. So the question that was asked originally was, if the internet was created before democracy was created, how would you create democracy so that it actually served its purpose and it delivered to its customer base what they expect? And when you then look at the existing system, you see that it is not at all what we would have created if we created it today. So what are some of the things? What are the intervention points that you use? First and foremost, the will of the people. In any government, on every issue, the majority position of the people should dictate the decisions that get made. MiVote, as an example, has a policy platform not unlike Democracy Earth, where the majority position, so our members, our users of the app, which will get launched in March, will get an opportunity to vote on every single policy that's created within the movement. And there is a constitutional requirement of the people who we put into the Senate to ensure that the majority position is always the position that is taken into Parliament on every occasion. So it's not about saying, well, we know what you want, but trust us, there are some other things going on here. It's about saying, we're going to provide you with information to know what you want to do. And once the majority has spoken, that's where we're going. No negotiation, and no way of moving around that point. The next critical point is non-ideological. So what we don't do is start pitching you things. You know, the most annoying thing about election is you stand there and for 6 weeks, and what was the last one? It was the most mind-numbingly long election campaign probably in history, certainly that I can remember. And all we did for weeks and weeks and weeks, we got pitched ideas. You should believe this, you should think that, trust us on the data, you don't need to see it, this is our view of the world. What MiVote does is says, you need to understand that there are actually different options that you can take. There's not one option that you should think about. Here are a variety of different destinations. So specifically what we do is we say, we're not talking about legislation. We've moved the conversation on from, do you support this bill, do you not support this bill? If you look at every digital democratic innovation in the world, that's the conversation at the moment. Do you support Manus? Do you support Nauru? Should we protect the environment? Should there be marriage equality? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. It's such a nonsense way of having a conversation. All of these issues are complex. All of these issues require you to understand some context about what's going on within them so that you can make an informed decision. So what we do is provide you with 4 different options for us as a people, as a collective, to go down, and not ones that are related to what happens in Parliament today so that I can get re-elected tomorrow. And when I say I, not me, I'm never running for anything, by the way. But so that whoever is in there is only making legislation that they think will protect the marginal seats at the next election. What we're talking about is destination. So I'll give you an example. If we're talking about asylum seekers, which has been obviously a massive issue politically for the last 3 elections, we are still a long way from getting anything that resembles a common sense approach to this conversation. Rather than saying, do you support Manus, do you support Nauru, do you support Malaysia, etc., we start with a much higher level conversation. And the conversation is, do you believe your country should take a primarily humanitarian approach? Or should it take a national security approach? Or should it take a financially pragmatic approach? Or should it take an international diplomacy approach? And then we explain what each of those things mean, so that you understand when you cast your vote and when you have a say on this issue, what that say actually means. When the majority of people have decided where we want to go as a country, then we can have a conversation about legislation. Because the legislation is effectively the contract. And in what business in the world do you write the contract before you know what the deal is? Only politics. That's the only place it happens. We write contracts, but we don't know what we actually want the deal to look like. So the next critical thing in a democracy is informed citizenry. So the way that the app will work, and you can start to play with it soon, very soon, which is exciting, is you'll be presented these 4 different destinations on every issue. And you'll get a cascading opportunity of information. So when you say, the UX will effectively be, you'll download the app will cost you nothing. It costs you nothing to be a member, unlike every other political movement. What will then happen is it'll say, do you want to opt in on the jobs policy issue, as an example? And you'll say yes. As soon as you click the yes, your personal library of information in your app will fill with all the information related to that issue. So you can then go in and understand what each of those 4 different destinations look like, what are the facts that sit behind them, what's the data and the research. You can read a very little bit, if that's how if you want a quick version of making a decision. You know, if you believe in a humanitarian approach, these are the things you believe in, these are the things you don't believe in, etc. You can say, you know what, I think that fits me, but I'm not entirely sure. Cascade down and get a 4 or 5 page overview that talks about the trends, that talks about the data. You still might get to that point and think, yeah, this is kind of where I want to be, but I want to understand if this is unbiased information. I want to know where it's come from. I want to know that it's real. And then you can go into the source documentation that our policy and research teams, who are dedicated professional researchers, have found all of this data. So there is nothing that is not available to you as a member. Everything that we're working from is the same material that you get to work from. And at that point, you get to vote. But you don't vote on what you think you want. So it's not about saying, I only want humanitarian, because it becomes, effectively, it's the same thing. You're saying, well, I want this instead of this. That's not the way the world works. The world is much more complex than that. And in fact, you need to have an understanding that there are a variety of different things. You can't be humanitarian but completely discount protecting the nation. You can't be completely obsessed about protecting the borders and not recognise that we have a humanitarian responsibility. So the way that we work, the way that our voting mechanism works, which is proprietary, and came off a 1979 NYU PhD paper, mathematics PhD paper, is about an opt-in, opt-out opportunity. So it says, here are the 4 frames. Which ones can you live with? So you can say, well, I can live with the first one and I can live with the second one, can't really live with the third one, but I can live with the fourth one. And what we're trying to do is start a policy conversation that's built on consensus rather than one that's binary and adversarial, which is what we have now. Because where we sit at the moment is you have parties who will disagree with their opposition, whether or not it's a good idea, just because they're the opposition. What we need as a people are the right decisions on every occasion. And you can't have that without understanding what the issues are and that there is a complexity around this. So for example, in the example I used, let's say that international diplomacy was the most popular frame. Most people said, I can live with that frame, they could live with a lot of others, but 80% of our members said, I can live with an international diplomacy frame. The way our senators then start is to say, that is what forms the basis of our policy. And when we sit in the Senate, every piece of legislation that the government, whether it's this side of government or that side of government, puts forward around this issue has to meet that destinational outcome. And if it doesn't meet that destinational outcome, we will never support it. There is no horse trading, there is no bartering. And I'll use a very timely example. In the last 36 hours, what we've seen is the Greens do a deal with the LNP. And they did a deal on the back of a bill that was an LNP bill. And opportunistically, and you understand why, this is the way the system works, they said, all right, we'll support your bill, but we want $100 million for something over here. Now, whether you believe in what the $100 million was for or not, that is fundamentally undemocratic. There was no conversation with the people about that money getting spent, the people's money being spent in that way. There was no understanding at all about what the constituency wanted on either part of that deal. But because smaller parties are effectively leveraged to a position where they have to take every opportunity they can to be obstructionist so that they can get their ideological agenda through, they use it. They will stop a bill to get what they need. That's fine, but the reason they're minor parties is because fewer people vote for them. Again, we're talking about the undemocratic thing again. When we had a member of our government sit on national television, I want you to really think about this for a second, sit on national television 2 months ago and say direct to camera, the reason we decided to ignore what we promised before the election now is because we have to protect our base. I want you to think about that. We have to protect our base. The total national membership of political parties is less than 1.3% of the Australian population. Protecting their base is less than 0.5% of the Australian population. So you have a party and a minister who is making a decision that affects 0.5 of 1% of the population. And the 99.5% of us are fundamentally ignored in that policy. This is not democracy. So where do we go? What else do we do? I've got more. There's steak knives. No corporate interest group or donations. MiVote constitutionally cannot accept money from businesses or interest groups of any kind. This is a individual donor-funded movement. If you want democracy, you contribute to us bringing about democracy. We launched it, we've been building this for over nearly 5 years, And we launched officially about 9 months ago as a brand. We launched the app in March. But since we started, we've generated nearly $1 million in individual donations from people who are concerned about the way the system works and want it to change. The way that that gives you some security is that you don't have the banking industry or the mining industry or the unions or anyone else saying, we're going to put in money, and by the way, we want a seat at the table when it comes to policy. And I'm going to show you how we fix that problem. And there are a number of former Prime Ministers who are looking at what we're doing here who are saying, holy shit, this is actually a great idea. So let's talk about what that looks like. And transparent and accountable. I'm not going to go into that, I've already explained it. You're the first people in the world to see this. So for months and months, I think I've probably done a media interview every 36 hours somewhere in the world for the last 5 months about what's happening with MiVote. And every journal I speak to wants to see this. You're the first people to see it. So let's talk about what it is. This is how it works. This is where the rubber hits the road. First and foremost, framing and policy. To get to a point where you can put 4 destinations up on your app and you can download those and understand them, you have to go through quite, it's a seemingly convoluted process, but it provides integrity into our system. So first and foremost, we start with university research. Well, when I say university research, it's data that's relevant to the issue. We're working with universities to help source that, because right now, from a resource perspective, we haven't got enough money to build those teams internally, but the intent is to have that be a full-time internal service. But we get the data that exists. Again, let's call it jobs policy. We go out with all the research reports that are relevant, what's happening in the world of jobs that we need to know. The next step is that we go into our working groups. Working groups are people who work in the space. They are domain experts. So we bring in people from the outsource agencies, from Human Services Department, from SEEK, from a whole range of other places to say, okay, this is what the data says, but what's actually practically happening on the ground? What do we need to know? What are the challenges to legislative change, and what are the opportunities that exist within the grassroots level? And then we go to our advisory committees. This, to me, is the most important and sexiest part of MiVote, bar none. The advisory committees are locked and loaded, so you'll see them also in the governance structure here. These are permanent fixtures to our operating mechanism. So these groups, underrepresented voices in our community, have a seat at the table in every policy conversation, every day, bar none. So once we know what the data says, and we know what's happening on the ground, now a whole group of people get to say, well, okay, that's jobs policy, this is what's happening on the ground. But if you look at jobs as an issue, what does it mean to the Indigenous community? What does it mean for in the gender equality space? What does it mean for the disabled? What does it mean for people who don't live in cities? Because that's how you start getting an understanding that we are a community and not a group of people who have to fight with each other on every issue. We are much closer than we think we are on almost everything. But you have to embed that conversation. And I'm going to make an announcement about that in 1 second. And then you go into the policy team who then puts the frames together. And you say, that's okay, great. So it's a little bit thorough, you've got some data, we understand where it's come from, there's a much broader set of voices that are put into the policy framing mechanism, but now we get into governance. Because how do you know that it's fair and it's objective? I've just told you that it's non-ideological, but a lot of people are uncomfortable about that. Who determines what's ideological, what's framed? So the way that works is that firstly, it has to be approved by the head of policy. And the head of policy's job, the remit of the head of policy, is to ensure that every piece of data and every bit of framing that gets put to the populace is first and foremost current, so it's recent, it's the best data that's available, it's the newest data that's available, it's valid, it's from a credible source, and it can be validated and verified. Then it goes down to our ethics committee. Our ethics committee's remit, so they sign it off, assuming the head of policy signs it off, it has to get signed off by the ethics committee. The ethics committee's primary responsibility is to ensure that every piece of material that gets put to you as a member of MiVote is not leading. The language is such that it's entirely objective. We're not writing things that kind of hint that you should go this way, or kind of hint that you should use this destination. It has to be genuinely objective. So that's the role of the ethics committee. The governance committee comes in and says, does it meet AEC regulations? Does it meet our own constitution? Does it meet our own value set? So that actually we're living what we're promoting, there's integrity in the system. And then finally the board signs it off. So that's everything that you would ever see on the app has to go through that level of scrutiny before it ever reaches you. There is no party in the world that does this. None. Pick a country, any country, Nobody does this. From a structural perspective, this is also pretty sexy. Well, I find it sexy, but I like democracy. So, governance and structure. What you don't see about these things, what you can't see on the side, is how these work. Every level of the structure of this organisation is built with A, transparency, and B, equality of opportunity. So although we're talking about an 18-seat board, or we call it the council, that board is comprised of different groups. So there are always rotating 3 from the advisory panels that will sit on the board for fixed terms. There are always 3 for international chapters to have a say at the headquarter level. There are always a group of executives who run our policy team to be informing decision making. And it's built in such a way so that the average voters themselves, so if we have 1 million members who are using MiVote app every day, they get to then vote for a number of seats that sit on the board in decision-making powers. So could you imagine the Labor Party or the Liberal Party or the Greens allowing you to vote for who will make decisions on their behalf? Doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Fully inclusive, fully transparent, government of the people, by the people, for the people, every day, and technological as well. So, since we started this wacky adventure 5 years ago, we were very lucky, very fortunate to be highlighted by Singularity University in August this year in San Francisco, and we were a finalist in the Grand Global Challenge Awards, which are ideas that they believe can positively affect 1 billion people around the world. And when we got up and we gave the speech in San Fran, we gave it with a real Australian intent and a real Australian context, because we built it for here, we're all locals, yeah? What we didn't expect at all was that the world would go completely nuts for this. So right now, we're up to 23 countries who are looking to start a MiVote chapter, and you will see international MiVote chapters emerge and have members in Parliament in 2017. So this is happening, people. This is real. People all over the world are saying, you thought you don't have democracy, you should see our democracy. It's much worse than your democracy. And people are looking at this and saying, it's fair, it's transparent, it doesn't provide for career politicians. So a couple of the other interventions, little ones. We talked about no corporate money, no lobby group money. One of the other things that's really important is we don't allow career politicians. Serving as a politician in a genuine democracy is a civic responsibility, it's a civil duty. So you're there for 2 terms maximum, and we have a constitutional requirement that should you be lucky enough to serve 2 terms in the Senate, you are required to mentor the next generation of MiVote senators. This is about serving a role. You are also not allowed to talk about your personal view on any issue. You're not allowed to advocate any view in Parliament until the members have spoken, and then only the majority position. So think about this. I have a lot of friends who are politicians. Probably they're less friends now, since this has sort of taken off, but lots of friends who are politicians. State and federal, both sides of politics. And the thing that they say consistently that they hate the most is the fact that they get door stopped, whether it's outside Parliament House, whether it's outside a meeting, whether it's outside their office. And this happens. Senator, what do you think about X? X happened 10 seconds ago. Senator doesn't know what X is even about, has never heard anything about X. But Senator is not allowed to say that they don't have an opinion, and they're not allowed to say that they don't know, because you get crucified in the papers the next day. So what is the most sensible thing to do when that happens to you? You default to the harshest, basest part of your ideological party. And that's where you go, because it's the safe zone. You'll always keep those hardcore members happy. What I love about MiVote is the capacity to say to media, we don't have an answer for that. Our members haven't spoken. We're a movement of the people, by the people, for the people. As soon as our members have voted on this issue, and we know what the majority position is, you'll be the first people we tell. But until that time, my opinion doesn't matter, and the people haven't spoken. That's a fundamental circuit breaker in the type of information that comes back to people. Because what you see currently, when you have to go back to that ideological base, what the newspaper says the next day is, so-and-so senator believes X. This party says this. But in fact, it might not be the best solution. It certainly might not represent the will of the people. So we've circuit breakered that. Finally, you'll see at the bottom there, just some of the publications and groups. What you'll see in the next week is a 900-word feature about us coming out globally in The Guardian. The week after that, there's one in HuffPost. Again, we're a feature of that book. This movement is going a little bit crazy. This is my last slide, and then I'll take questions if we have time, and otherwise I'll get off and let you get on with your wonderful program. I'm very thrilled to announce for the first time when we were talking about the way that the structure works for the advisory committees. I'm happy to announce today, and you'll be able to see stuff on their website today and ours as well, that the Foundation for Young Australians, the FYA, which many of you know and most of us love, which is the largest advocacy group for young people in this country, we signed today a working partnership contract with the FYA to ensure that young people in this country are better engaged, have better access to information, are better involved in the political process, so that the decisions that get made and will affect them the most, because they will be living the longest, they are involved in that conversation every day. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Questions? Yeah, Adam, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for making up the time. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and I think there's probably a lot based on what we've just covered, so who'd like to kick us off? Or maybe there's none. Yeah, actually, one from here.
With a large portion of voters being senior citizens who don't use devices, how is that going to impact, or how do they get their vote counted?
So, really good question. What we do know is that the vast majority of Australians have a mobile phone. So they might not be on, there are currently more, and I take my friend Jamie who taught this statistic to me only this week, there are more people in the country who have phone accounts than have email accounts. The reason that we're doing this via phone is because we can capture the most market. It's also worth saying that we are very well aware, and personally I have a relationship with the elders in Arnhem Land, and there are parts of Arnhem Land that I visited that they don't even have proper electricity every day, let alone cell phones. So part of what we're building within our fundraising movements is an opportunity for people to donate to communities that don't currently have that infrastructure, so we can embed the infrastructure. They can then use it for other things. So for example, we could put a bank of computers inside Yirrkala in Arnhem Land as an example. They can then use those computers for whatever they want, but at least we can load MiVote there and they can participate in the conversation.
So this is a really quite convoluted question.
Convoluted system, don't worry about it.
But given the nature of like transparency from a governmental point of view, and how, I mean, sometimes the government needs to make decisions that we need rather than what we want. I mean, classic recession, the recession that we had to have, I think it was in the 80s or early 90s, around there. And with the whole, I mean, a perfect example is like Trump and the whole populist movement in certain areas of America, and how you can kind of say outrageous things, or, I mean, people vote in, particular manner. And then if you look at research by like Edward Bernays and that kind of thing, how are you dealing with, say, third parties significantly influencing the vote to a more populist perspective?
It's not possible. So we've spent...
Well, I mean, for example, like if I'm a voter, I can get my information from a whole range of different sources.
So here's the problem. So what we've seen lately, it's an excellent question by the way, what we've seen lately is a variety of studies, I'm sure you've seen them on social media floating around, that there are a group of universities and researchers who investigated for sort of in a longitudinal study the media patterns of far left and far right voters. So they followed them for an extended period of time and looked at everything that they were reading, everything that was coming in their Facebook feed, everything that they were seeing on Twitter, Snapchat, everywhere. Where are they getting their information? What they concluded is that those people basically live on two different planets. Their understanding of what's going on in the world is so fundamentally different based on who is providing them information, that the reason they vote and have such extreme differences of opinion is because they don't get to see any part of the logic that exists in the other side. So you will lean one way or the other politically, or maybe you're a dedicated centrist. I have my own personal views. Well, my personal views don't matter. What matters, and this is why the informing citizenry component of what I was talking about is so important. We believe fundamentally that the primary responsibility of any government, the primary responsibility, is informing its citizens. Because if you can't allow people to see the facts, then how can you possibly ask them to vote for outcomes? How can you talk about where you want to go if you don't even know where you are? So the reason that we embed different versions of information and we provide you destinations that might look a little bit like the right, destinations that might look a little bit like the left, is because you have to understand that there are different opinions about these things. there is information that you need to see, whether you want to see it or not. And here's the kicker. If you download the app, and if you opt into the jobs policy, and if you read through the information, you can't just look at the frame of reference that is your ideological position. Unless you open every single destination and read through it, your voting light will never go on. So what we say is, if you choose not to inform yourself, we choose not to listen to you. Yes, we will be doing that, but we won't be doing it in the first iteration. The question for those who couldn't hear was, will we open source the policy piece so that people can suggest alternative options? So we will at some point get to that stage. We made a very deliberate council decision that we didn't want the ideological conversation to sit in the mechanism where people are voting that needs to be validated by fact and go through the ethics portfolio. So you can put on, look at the whole Trump thing, you could basically spew forth whatever you want that's not validated, that nobody knows if it's real or not, the whole fake news debacle. But that's never going to happen on the MiVote platform. We might create a secondary MiVote space for our constituents to have conversations with each other, and they can then make suggestions about other ideas, but that won't sit inside the voting mechanism area.
Yeah, I just want to say, amazing, love your work. And the other thing is, you mentioned that there was going to be MiVote chapters springing up around the world. What's involved in a chapter? Can you explain that a little bit?
So at this stage, what it effectively, the way to think about it is a non-commercial franchise, basically. So you could start a chapter wherever you want, but you have to adhere to all the laws and governing principles of MiVote. So some countries have come to us and said, we already have established a brand in our local market, we don't want to use MiVote, but we want to use your app, your mechanism, your voting platform, etc., etc. In that example, we will charge them a license fee for those areas. That money gets poured back into the movement so we can reinvest. But for most parts, most of those 23 country conversations are actually saying, we want to be MiVote Romania, MiVote Singapore, MiVote England, or UK. And if that's the case, then what really happens there is we say, we'll give you everything. So you have to adhere by our voting mechanism, our governance structure, no financial donations, no more than 2-term senator, majority wins every time, all of those mechanisms. And assuming you adhere to those rules, you can continue being MiVote wherever. The minute you step outside of any of those governance structures, we pull everything back, including the finance, including the technology, everything else.
Hi. Given some of the issues that you probably addressed before with political funding, how will MiVote be funded?
Funded by individual donations.
I have another question, sorry. Given that there's so many countries involved in this, or potential countries that are going to be involved, can it be used to shape global policy?
That's what we're hoping. So one of the things that I should say is that I mentioned that we started with Australian context and intent. Given that it seems to it's having such an impact around the world, we've set a number of goals. So the first goal that I can tell you is that we're 23 months away from the next federal election in Australia. So November 2018 will be the next federal election. MiVote is setting itself a target for 3 Senate seats, 1 million members, and 5,000 volunteers. To put that into context, 81,000 is the total combined number of all of the major parties' membership, 81,000. We are going after 1 million members, and our intent in 5 years is to be the biggest single-branded political movement in the world. So we're going to take on the Greens. That's what we're going to do.
This is a two-parter as well. You talk about MiVote membership and members participation isn't compulsory. What do you think the projected critical mass is?
It's an excellent question.
For this movement to be impossible to ignore, and for the data, and secondly for the data to be useful. My second question is, MiVote to me would attract there's a certain profile of the user that would participate in this, and it's someone who's maybe politically disenfranchised.
Okay, so let me talk about that question first, okay? Because when I started this 5 years ago, that's exactly what I thought. And people default to this place that says it's going to be young, urban, white university people. That's what I hear every day of the week. It is fundamentally wrong. I have given speeches in rural townhouse, out townhouses, Rotary clubs, all over the place. Everywhere I go, this resonates. We have members, we have volunteers, we have hundreds of volunteers. Some of our volunteers were, active members of the Liberal Party and the Labor Party and the Greens Party. They actually canvassed at the last election who were going, our system isn't as good as this. This actually is fairer. It's a better system. So we speak for everybody. We can represent everybody if everybody chooses to understand what we're putting in front of them. Some people won't. There will be a core base who will always stick to what they know, what's comfortable. For us, we talk internally about our biggest challenge isn't taking on the political parties, because I will stand on any stage, anywhere in the country, in front of any camera, with the opposition leader there, with the Prime Minister there, and I will go toe-to-toe on policy, structure, governance, any day of the week. We will beat them hands down. The challenge for us is different. The challenge is having people embrace something new. It's a behavioural challenge for us, because people have had this entrenched idea about what politics is, and what we're saying is it doesn't have to be that. That's our biggest challenge. What was the first part of the question?
Critical mass.
Critical mass, really good question. So, given that we want 3 Senate seats, critical mass is enough people in specific electorates to allow us to do that. That's the reality. So, and the truth is, even if we won 1 Senate seat, what we're able to do is demonstrate in real terms every day what genuine democracy looks like. So none of this horse, you've got this position at the moment where bills are being held up in Parliament. Whether they're good bills or bad bills is irrelevant for now. They're being held up by people who got 77 primary votes. I could get 77 primary votes in this room right now.
I just counted, there's about 200 right
There you go, awesome. I'm not running, by the way. So the issue is that we need to have enough people talking, and for us, we've set ourselves, critical mass for us, is 1 member more than the combined membership of all the other parties put together in this country. So 81,000 and we're pretty much there.
We're just about to run out of time, so this will be our last question, then we'll move on.
Hi. Will you have some sort of dynamic feedback mechanism to show what the impact was of what the voters have done? So you started off with this data. People made their vote. You'd like to have shifted it.
100%. So it's an excellent
and you
question.
want to see that.
And we do. So you will see that. So you'll be able to see that live in the first version of the app that you'll get. You can see how you voted and how the majority voted, frame by frame, issue by issue. So we were going to disclose it today, but we haven't talked about what the app looks like. We could walk you through it. For some of you who want to see it, Jamie, who's our technical lead, can walk you through it because it's live now. You can play with bits of it. But, sorry, it's not live. It's closed, but it works. We do have that, where you can go in and look. You can look at your voting history, and what we're able to do is, let's say we have 100,000 people who vote on the jobs policy. We'll send out, when we send it out to you, and say, hey, you voted on this frame. Unfortunately, this was the frame that got the most support, but on the frame that got the most support, this is how many came from the city, this is how many were men, this is how many were women, this is how many, were this socioeconomic group, etc., etc. So you get to start understanding where people are voting and how people are voting. Not that it makes a difference, but it informs you, and it informs the political conversation, which is important. The other thing that's critically important is when you start talking about the dynamics of it, we've inbuilt some systems, some mechanisms into the process. I'll give an example. If I stand on the stage today, we have, call it 3,000 members for argument's sake, we take a vote on jobs policy. We have a very clear majority position for a destination. We say that now forms the policy basis of the movement. But if in 6 months' time we have 3 million members, how can we legitimately say that the vote that we took there represents the will of the people today? Because you've got so many more people and it might not be accurate at all. So there are mechanisms built in so that once a vote is taken, if our membership has changed by 50%, we have to take the vote again. We have to continually ensure that we are genuinely reflecting what our members want on every issue all the time. If we take a vote and less than 25% of our members choose to engage on that issue, so let's say we're talking about something that some tax reform issue that's not particularly sexy, and only 20% of the people of our membership base vote on the issue, that does not form a policy position. We go to a second and third runoff, and I won't go into that now because I'm happy to talk to you all about it, but it's too much detail for right now. But we get to a point where we can still get to our 60% majority. And I say that, I didn't mention that before. Majority for us is not 51%, it's not 50 plus 1. It is a 60% destinational majority. And until we get 60%, we don't have a policy. So when we stand up and say in the Senate, our members want the majority wants, we genuinely mean the majority wants. We're not talking about a disenfranchised 50% who are going to be super pissed off that what they want is ignored. We can genuinely say that the vast majority of people want this. And because you're able to choose multiple frames rather than single frames, we're going to start from numbers that are much higher anyway. So you start from that consensus position.
Thank you very much, Alan. Let's give you a big round of applause.